problems for me.
We're gonna get started here.
Grab me one.
Welcome again, and particularly to Michelle and Mike that made it through the day, yay, and Allison is somewhere. Maybe she made it walk out.
What about for Audrey? She had to go
Yes,
too.
Audrey, did she? Yeah. First day, oh, yeah. Did you have fun? Okay. Well, you know your way around a little bit. Yeah. So today it's a pretty simple agenda, but in terms of the list, but it's going to be lots of work. We have Tom Golden from NAC will be talking to us about, talking to the group about the costs of the big picture costs of some of the different scenarios that the group has been looking at. I want to thank Jimmy and Michelle for doing the status report, the oral part of the status report to the board. That meant that there didn't have to be a written report, which was wonderful, so thank you. There is a...
We have you surrounded.
Apparently we have this room instead of the far over there room, the one with the stage, because there was going to be a really loud group in between. So instead they put us in here and put the really loud group way over there. So I don't know.
We may get there. We may get there yet.
Yeah, right. Who knows? Okay, so and Nona has a sign-up sheet again for the district visits, the Sela and Wapato visits, site visits. The times and or dates have changed. The Sela School District site visit is Friday the 5th, so day after tomorrow, but the tour begins at 3:30 instead of 9:30 in the morning.
Where do we meet?
At the Ellensburg School District offices at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
And 2:30, sorry. Yeah, well, the bus will leave at 2:30.
I thought it was going to leave at 3:30.
Apparently not.
Whoever told you that doesn't want you there.
No, that's not true.
Well, I may not be there.
So you can't come at 2:30?
I don't know, I have one big
Okay.
occupational therapy appointment. I don't know how long, and that's over close to Safeway. I could probably get down and try.
Well, what she says is that each day the bus will leave the district office at 2:30, taking 1 hour to arrive at the destination. So it sounds like there was kind of a disconnect. But here are the sign-up sheets. It's back to back. I'll send them around. So if you're going to be able to, if you want to take that tour, those tours, and can make it, sign up. And if there's a problem with that time, sounds like you thought it was going to leave at 3:30, and she thought the tour was going to. Well, that means you can't come because
I was notified that
all the people that we changed it to the that she changed it to the afternoon for still doesn't work.
they changed that I thought from earlier to 3:30.
Yeah, and so it looks like she was thinking that the tour started. Okay, well that sounds like, put your name down there, and if the time is a problem, just make a note after that, and I'll talk to her about that tomorrow. Okay. One other thing, is anybody interested in seeing the Madison School? It's the renovated school in Seattle that is similar to the old parts to the 3-story parts of Morgan, and was apparently designed by the same architect, and is apparently quite nice inside. I don't know, I have not seen it. Is anybody interested in seeing that?
Where did you say it was?
In Seattle, someplace. Somebody tell me.
West Seattle.
West Seattle. Okay, so we have interest in, put them up high. Okay, plenty, okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so she's looking at a Saturday. It cannot happen this Saturday, apparently. You can't do a Saturday? Oh, okay. So, I guess we'll just by email deal with that, because she hasn't heard anything back from the Madison School people. She's been trying to get in touch with them, and they haven't responded. So, she'll be in touch about that. Okay, on to the fun bits. The agenda. Any questions about the agenda? You should all have a copy. And by the way, for observers, there's copies of the agenda and some support materials, as well as comment cards if you'd like to write questions or comments on the comment cards. Any questions on the agenda? Call for consensus for proceeding with the meeting and according to the agenda. Okay, this is actually just to get you guys to get the cards out. Okay,
I have an answer.
okay, you have an answer. I don't think I should have put you two together. I think that was probably a big mistake. Okay, so now Tom Golden from NAP is going to tell everybody about the costs for several of the different scenarios that he's given, 6 different scenarios. Okay, so welcome, thank you.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to see the numbers when they get up there. It truly was not intentional that you couldn't see them. But before I get started, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about cost estimating at this level in general. And these are sort of big picture costs, and so based mostly on square foot costs of similar projects or recent projects, and then sort of escalated a certain amount to the bid date of 2016. So again, it's sort of this level of cost estimating, I like to say, is part science and part art. And so the numbers you're going to see they're based on history and based on similar projects, but they also are just that, they're estimates and guidelines for budgeting. So, disclaimer over. I think you've all seen this graphic. What I did was highlight the actual scenarios that we were asked to price, or put a price to. And so some of these are new, built on other sites and various options, and some of them are remodel or a combination of remodel and some new additions on the existing Morgan site. We'll get into a little bit more specifics about what each of these is when we get to each one. But before I get too far into it, I want a little bit of term definition. In the construction business, especially in the public construction business, there are what are called hard costs and what are called soft costs. And this may be a review for a lot of you, but I kind of wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page. Hard costs are what essentially is the actual construction cost. That's the cost that the contractor would bid. We put out a set of drawings asking for how much to bid this, or how much to build this project. That's the number that would come back. It includes the building and the site, everything that's in the set of working drawings. In addition to that, there are soft costs, which are not included in the contractor's price. And some of those major items include sales tax. It includes the fees that the architects and engineers get paid. It includes all the furniture and equipment that goes in a building. So if you take the building, turn it upside down, basically everything falls out. And then it also has some contingencies, and that's sort of just safeguarding your cost estimate or your project budget in case anything goes wrong. So the total of hard costs plus soft costs then equals the total project cost. So it's important to have a distinction of what those are and how they relate to each other. The other thing, and I don't know if you can see this, but it doesn't really matter what the numbers are, there's a piece of financing that comes from the state. and this is called the School Construction Assistance Program. So we kind of went through the formula and estimated how much Ellensburg School District would be eligible to receive from the state for Morgan Middle School project. And the way that works is you take your eligible area, in this case it's about 100,000 square feet, and we get that by taking the size of the existing school, the whole school itself, and subtracting out the area that's not eligible because it's too new. So in other words, this 1994 section, that area is not eligible. It has to be, it's 30. They changed it to 30 in about 1992. So that's 100,000 square feet. And then the state comes up with $1 per square foot that they're willing to pay, and our number that we used is about $212. That is higher than what it is right now, but it essentially goes up a few percentage points every year. And so we elevated it, or escalated it to 2016. And then there's a percentage that every school district has that the state figures out. And that's a very complicated formula that makes my head hurt. And suffice it to say, your percentage is 54%. If you want to know how they get that, you can talk to me after the meeting. But you multiply all those together, and we get a number of about 11.5 million. And then on top of that, they also assist with some of the soft costs. And usually that's in the neighborhood of 15% of what your hard cost assistance would be. So add that together for about $13.3 million is what we're using as anticipated state assistance dollars. Any questions?
Is that regardless of remodel or build new?
Yes.
Same figure?
Yes. And in fact, they use the same $1 per square foot allocation for new or remodel.
Okay.
Oh, can we get that?
Yes, I can give you the whole presentation.
Tom, that last figure there, total anticipated state assistance is how much?
It's $13,309,115.
13 million.
Yes. And again, that is, some of that's just projected through to 2016. So, and this percentage changes every year. This construction cost allocation changes every year. So we just try to anticipate what that change might be. So it's in that neighborhood when you won't really know exactly what that number is until 2016 when you actually go through the state process and they lock it down at a particular time. Okay, so looking at each of the 6 options, and I say 6, but there's actually 7, because on one of them, and you'll see how we did this, on one that's a partial remodel, partial addition, we have kind of 2 concepts, and we priced both of them out. So it's a G1 and G2. This is option A, which you can't see the title up there, but trust me, it's option A. So option A is building a new building on either the Valley View site, the site that I think is south of Capitol Avenue, and then, or some other site. And it's, in essence, it doesn't really matter what the site is. We priced it out as sort of a generic site. So we had to make some assumptions on what this new building would be. And talking with Paul a little bit, I wanted to make sure he knew what our assumptions were and that we were kind of on the same page. We came up with a target square footage of 115,000, which would comfortably serve 800 students. And this 83.3 capacity means out of 6 periods a day, 5 of those, every teaching station is occupied 5 out of 6 periods a day. So there's essentially a planning period for every classroom. That's sort of ideal capacity. You can start eating up some of those planning periods and grow to 900 or so if you are willing to do that without having to really add any square footage.
Does the state restrict what capacity percentage you use?
Not that I'm aware of.
So if you're not at 95%, you're at 83%, they're not gonna argue with you?
No, no. We also assumed a new auditorium that would have 550 seats, plus or minus. A portion of those would be fixed, available all the time, and a portion of those would be retractable or move away, or some form or fashion that you could capture that space as a common space or some other space where you didn't need that many seats. And in essence, it's very similar in size and configuration to the new school at Sea Life.
Sorry, but the space you capture by contracting the seats is on the other side of the wall, is that correct? It's not within the auditorium. Could you do something at the same time in the auditorium, is my question?
Yes, I believe so.
Concurrent.
Yeah, we
That's
would
fine.
shoot for that, yes. And I kind of went through these in a little bit of detail because you'll see these on some of the other ones. And so we tried to make things as close to apples as possible. So here are the numbers you can't see, I'm sure. But what I did was to break down, this top section is hard costs, middle section is soft costs, and then sort of totals and subtracting out the match down below to get the total bond amount, potential bond amount for this. So if we walk through these numbers, and these items here, I'll probably go through these on the first one. You'll see them on most of the other ones as well. Again, we tried to compare apples to apples as much as we could. Under hard costs, we have the actual building construction, and we're estimating that at about $25.5 million, or $220 a square foot for the building, and that's an escalated number. So that is $2016. The site will be about another $5 million, and that's fields, building, preparation for building the building, any utilities that serve the building, and then landscaping on top of that. We have a line item called auditorium premium, and what that means is that for the building, $220 a square foot will buy you most of the space, but an auditorium carries a premium with it. It's a space that's really just, it costs more than the $220 a square foot. It's got seating, it's got stage rigging, it's got lighting, it's got additional volume. It all kind of costs more than what you can build for $220 a square foot. So we've added all that up, and it's about $900,000 in our estimation. This line item that's zero is a phasing premium, and that only shows up as a cost if you're building, if you're remodeling, essentially, and you're not going to empty out the school. You're going to have to work in one area, move some kids in, take over another area, kind of do the hopscotch thing. And that's a hard thing to quantify, but it's a real cost, and a lot of times it's just, the cost is the delay in the time that's added to a project. When you're building new somewhere else, obviously that's not a problem. We know that there's some soil and groundwater issues, at least at the Valley View site, so we tried to allow for some of that. It's $250,000, and that's roughly what was paid at the high school. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's a place it's a placeholder for right now. And then another line item is off-site construction, and that's basically work that has to go on outside the property line, whether it's bringing the utilities to the site, street development, curbs, maybe some off-site parking, we don't know, and it largely depends on the site itself. But we didn't want to ignore that. And then the last one under hard costs is existing building demo or remodel. Right now, but this cost does not have any money in there for doing anything with the existing building. Soft costs, I think we can kind of march through these a little quicker. Sales tax is 8%. Architect engineer fees, and that's driven by a formula that is generated by the state. There's project management fees, which is Bill International is your current project management company. Furniture and equipment. Again, here's another one that's zero on this particular one. It's temporary housing that kind of goes along with the phasing. That only happens if you're going to remodel and you want to bring portables onto the site to get kids out of the building, to tackle a larger portion of the building at one time. It's not an issue here. Then there's some other miscellaneous costs. There's a lot of permitting and reviews and commissioning and just a bunch of other services that go into a process like this. And the last one is the contingencies, and that's for change orders during construction. We're carrying that at 5%, and then you just never know if the scope changes or grows. We've got a 2.5% contingency in there for that.
What percentage are you using for contingencies here? Do you know?
Yeah, 5% for change orders and 2.5% for scope.
So 7.5.
7.5. And that's for new. It'll change a little bit.
Thank you. 2.5%. Or
Scope.
scope change.
So our totals, and you probably can't see them, hard costs of 32.5 for the whole building and site, 11.5 for soft costs, total of 44.1. And we subtract that 13.3 million from the state from that, and we're at about 30,800,000. There's a 1% bond issuance cost that's a mystery to me, but they always tell me to put it in. And so a total, in this particular case, we said the bond amount would be $31,151,000 to build a new school on the site, on essentially any site. Over here, highlights, again, I say there's no money for doing anything with the existing Morgan Middle School. And there's also, that doesn't include any money for land acquisition if there's a site that he hasn't bought yet. And that's just kind of hard to pin down, and we didn't do that for any of the scenarios, actually. That's option A. Any more questions? Sure.
Just for observers, there are cards. If you have questions for Tom, please go ahead and write them down and get them up to me and we'll ask them.
I have one quick question about, could you give an example of scope change under contingencies?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of times as we get into a project, something might change, some circumstance might change. We need 2 more classrooms. We need to make this 120,000 instead of 115,000. It's really hard to predict, and we just like to have at least a little bit of cushion in there for circumstances that change between now and when you actually design the building.
And that's distinguished from change orders how?
The change order contingency is for during construction, is for unknowns. For example, at the high school, when we ran into soils or unsuitable soils, that was a change order So it was done after the contract had already been signed with the contractor for X amount, and it wasn't their fault that there was some bad soil into there. So that was pulled out of the change order contingency and paid that way. So it's held on to essentially all the way through construction and doled out as necessary during its process.
Really quick one. In your experience of any, are there any projects that if planning was tight, that no contingency funds were needed and that money was saved?
Not no contingency money. 5% on a new project is probably average. I don't know. We like to say that we produce really great drawings and that the contractor doesn't run into as much. We're usually in the 2 to 3% when all is said and done. So you can capture money there, but it's not something you.
I'm sure it wasn't your planning that caused all that. Thank you.
Allison, and then Jimmy?
I think he was first, actually.
Oh, okay, Jimmy, and then Allison.
My question is for more information regarding the potential groundwater problems on the Valley View site. Since you have had that experience previously with the high school, I assumed that there would not be a necessity for a change order or more contingency dollars for that problem with this project.
That's correct. So that's why it's
Thank you.
here under the hard cost, is because we were planning for it beforehand.
Thank you.
My question is, if we accept the state funding assistance, are there strings attached? Like, do you have to vacate the old Morgan?
You don't have to necessarily vacate it. You cannot use the area that you accept the money for mainstream educational purposes. So you can have administration in there, you can have other programs in there, after school, extracurricular, those kinds of things. The portion that is not eligible does not fall under that. So you can use the 1994 portion because that stays on the state's inventory list until it's at least 30 years old, so you can still use that. So yes, there are restrictions.
So I wanted to add something in response to Jimmy's question. An example, I don't know if I would have said no, you wouldn't have any other costs for the soils. What we see at the university is sometimes you don't know how much of the soil is too wet or unsuitable. And so in our bid documents at the university, for example, we have a unit cost that the contractor bids, and it's like so many dollars per square cubic yard of unsuitable soils that have to get removed and replaced by suitable soils. And so we kind of have a set number, but the quantity isn't determined until they start excavating. And so we limit our change orders that way, but a lot of, it can't all be decided unless you pothole the whole site, which isn't necessarily feasible. But so even if you understand that there could be unsuitable soils, the exact quantity could vary and affect a change order, I think.
Yeah, that's well said. Yes, we'll try to do everything we can to mitigate it beforehand, but it's unknown. I mean, it's all underground, so you just don't know what you're going to get into. I think we would do a better job of testing and knowing a little bit better about what the pitfalls could be there than we did on the high school.
I like those explanations better than due diligence. That tells me nothing.
This is a question on the state funding assistance on mainstream. Can the district choose which portions of the 30-year window to use? So, for instance, there's been some discussion that the 66 wing is still functional, it works, and may serve needs of students. So, which would of course affect
Right.
the map.
You don't have to choose to maximize your state assistance amount if you don't want to. You could subtract the square footage of this section out of the 100,000 and not accept the matching money for that. And then you could continue to use that, but your amount that you, obviously the amount that you would factor in here would be less.
And if you were to construct it, so you wouldn't have to physically build it.
Well, if you want
Continue
to,
to use that.
use them separate sides. Yeah. Okay. Is that it? How are we doing? The other one's a little faster. Okay, so I think this is option C on your list, which is an interesting option, and it was essentially building a new school on a site and then also remodeling Morgan, so you end up with 2 middle schools that are essentially in the 500 students each category. And so this one was a little bit harder to know exactly what the motivation was. And I think when the dollars show up, you're going to understand why. In essence, it's 2 projects. It's building a new school and then remodeling it also. So it's not quite twice the price, but it's getting close. And we targeted the new school there to be smaller and at 90,000 square feet for 500 students. One of the things you can't, if you want to build a school that's only targeted for half the enrollment, you can't just cut the area in half. It doesn't work that way. You still have to have a gym that's a certain size. You have to have music rooms that are a certain size. So you can reduce the number of classrooms, but it's not going to just cut the space in half. So we targeted 90,000 square feet. And then for the modernization part of Morgan, we kind of said, well, let's just figure out how to do the minimal amount to that. And so it's going to be similar to another option that we'll get to. But we probably, I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but essentially, it's, like I said, it's 2 projects. So your hard costs are in the $50 million range. The soft costs are 20. You have a total project cost of over $71 million. Same amount of state funding. You maximize that. A bond amount of $58.6 million. Now, I know that's a lot, but you end up with 2 schools. So if that's worth it, it could be a viable option. But again, it's $58 million. It's a lot more than anybody has really talked about as a barometer.
Joanne?
So another factor in here, which I'd like the school district to respond to, is what would the additional operational costs be for having 2 schools versus 1? And would we be able to quantify that to consider in the equation?
Well, just starting with things like you have 2 libraries, 2 librarians, 2 sets of office staff, 2 sets of counseling staff, 2 sets of administration. So you would have roughly the same number of teachers, although you can't necessarily just divide them in half. So you'd have roughly the same number of teachers, but pretty much any other staff. And so I don't know how to quantify that.
Well, wouldn't you need 2 specialists also? Like if you have music, you would need 2 music teachers.
Or, well, a lot of our music teachers right now are already
Oh,
divided
oh.
between schools.
Oh, okay.
But things like libraries and counselors, and it wouldn't be feasible. And you lose teaching time for teachers who shift between schools. It's not possible for a full-time teacher to teach as many students if they're split between schools, because they have travel time and there's different bell schedules and all those things. So you always lose some time, which then leads to overstaffing, because you have to the students still need to be taught. So,
Yeah, and that certainly is a factor. Oops.
Okay, Mike, did you have a?
I was just saying, in addition to what Michelle was saying, you're talking 2 sets of science equipment for the science labs,
PE equipment, you're talking, staff, not the staff in the library, but 2 sets of library books. Library books are expensive. Additional sets of computer labs, because you can't just have a computer lab in one school, you have to have multiple ones in each school. So.
Yeah, this certainly doesn't factor any of that. There's no M&O costs because it's beyond our capability to quantify that, and it would be quite an exercise for you to do that, I would imagine. And then again, no extra land acquisition money in there either. The next one is E, option E on the list, and that is kind of interesting. It's actually building on the existing site where the field is now, building a brand new building there, and then tearing down the existing Morgan completely and putting a new field and track in that area. What would be kind of known as a replacement project. And we have the same assumptions for this building on this site as we did for option A, which was a new building on another site. So it's sort of apples to apples in terms of the building cost and size and everything. It also includes demoing the existing building and putting the new, like I mentioned, a new playfield or track on where the current building is. This option actually ends up being not all that different than A. Really, the only difference is the site development cost. You're talking about a much smaller site, so the cost for the site would be less. There still would be some stuff to get utilities to where the new building is going to be. You still have to put in the field and the track once the old building is demolished. So there's still definitely some site costs. We also, there's no phasing because you can occupy the existing building while the new one's being built. We did put some money in there for soils and groundwater at a reduced amount, thinking that the issues wouldn't be as severe there. We can argue whether that's a good assumption or not. And we were kind of thinking that there would be a little bit less off-site construction since it's a more developed site. But the cost to tear down the building is a little over $1 million in our estimate. So that's a piece that wasn't in the previous option A. So the hard costs in this scenario are about $32 million. The soft costs are actually very similar. You're paying sales tax in about the same amount. Fees are generally the same amount of furniture, same amount of contingency. The total project cost then is about $43.4 million. Same amount of state funding assistance gets subtracted out of that. So the bottom line on this one is the bond amount would be about $30.4 million. So that's somewhere around $700,000-800,000 less than building on a different site, and all of that can really be attributed to the site costs.
Bruce has a question, and Tor.
Just a quick one. So this assumes demoing the entire site, or would you retain utilization of some portion?
It would demolish the entire building.
So 1994, everything?
Everything.
Okay, Tor.
For your estimate of $1,103,000 for the building demolition, what does that site look like when you're done? It looks like a dirt field, basically,
No,
everything's carted away?
It sort of looks like what this looks like now. It's grass, it's the potential of a track, or however else you want to develop that. If you want tennis courts or more, some other configuration. It has dollars in there to redevelop that site once the building's torn down.
But only $1 million to take all of that away.
That's demolition, that's
Yeah.
not rebuilding the site.
No, I know, it's just that, like any community, numbers float around, and that's a very low number compared to the one that floated around me.
Really?
So, that's awesome, I mean, that's great.
It's about $10 a square foot we're figuring for demo and removal of hazardous waste.
Okay, Joanne and then Mike.
I would assume that the area of the track where you would build on is smaller than the footprint of the existing building, is that correct? And if so, what kind of building do you see? A 2-story, 3-story to fit on that site?
Well, I think we shoot for a 2-story. It might be a more compact footprint than if we had more luxury. I don't know, I actually don't know how, where this line is, if that's about halfway between the site or if it's more. I think that, it would be the same square footage, but it might be, more 2-story space than if we have more spread out.
I worry it's not room for the building.
It could be an issue.
Okay, Mike, did you have a quick comment?
Just a very quick one. If we look at the chart that Tom has up here, where the north arrow is, there's actually a creek that runs right through there. And so that would be a groundwater consideration. That would be a challenge to build on top of the property.
Yes.
And did you have a question?
I think he kind of answered that I was concerned about the groundwater.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're not extremely familiar yet with that site, but glass floor would be nice.
Steve, did you have a further information?
Yeah, the current building occupies almost 2 blocks of the 3-block long site, and the track is a bit over 1 block.
Okay. So it would be a challenge. A couple of challenges. Okay. This is F. This is the first real modernization option, and that is basically what would it take to do sort of the minimal remodel, get it up to code, all codes, safety, energy, replace the infrastructure systems, and then add on just enough to meet the program deficiencies that the current school has. And what that does, it results more like in a school that's about 120 to 122,000 square feet, rather than being able to be really efficient in a new building and keep it to 115. It's about a 5% penalty just because of loss of efficiency of circulation for an existing building, and you're not going to solve those problems in a remodel. So this is sort of, it's a combination of using a certain set amount of dollars per square foot for additions and a certain amount for modernization of the various areas. What we figured was the older portion was going to take more dollars per square foot to remodel. The newer portions were going to take a little bit less. So we divided it up that way for a total amount of building costs of about $24 million. The site, there would be less site development because you wouldn't really need, you're not disturbing as much, but there still are some site costs. The auditorium premium in this particular one is less than a new building because you already have the volume. You're buying new seats, new rigging, new lighting, but the bones of it are already there. So the premium is not as high. There is a phasing premium, and I think I talked about that in hopscotching around. We put that at $500,000. Soil groundwater issue, we have nothing in there for that because we figure that it's an existing site. Maybe there aren't any. Again, maybe there's soil groundwater issue everywhere here. Maybe a little less off-site construction as well. Soft costs again they're pretty steady. They're always around 11 or 12 million. A little bit higher on a remodel because the contingency, the change order contingency here is higher. It's about 7.5 because you never know what you're going to get into in an existing building. So you want to kind of conserve a little bit more money just in case something happens. So total project cost, when you add those together, 41.5. Again, subtract the 13 million for state funding. And the bond cost is somewhere around 28.5 million. That's what we're saying for this one.
Lauren?
Just a little bit more on the 1 million for temporary housing.
Oh,
I
yeah,
just
that's a
wondered
good
what, how that was figured. What's in that?
Well, it's a pretty round number, so you can figure that it was generated that way. You can get about 8 portables for $1 million. So if you choose to move students out to tackle more, you could bring portables onto the site if there's room. I think that there's ways to reduce that amount if they're, right now, you guys are in the situation where the 8th graders are not on site and you're not using a large portion of the school, so it's already empty. So you could possibly save some money there by leaving the 8th grade class where they are until the project is finished and then bringing them back on site. So that could be a target for area for reduction. We're on a roll now. Okay, so this is the first option of remodeling and adding on to this. That's a little bit more extensive demolition and addition. So in this particular case, what we would say is, and this is an idea that was floated to us a few weeks ago to take a look at, so we did. Maybe a little controversial. So this would demolish the oldest portion of the building, which is what many consider the most historic piece of the building. So the 1935-1929 section. It would save the auditorium, it would save the gym, and then it would demolish and replace these 1953 wings here. It would leave in place the classrooms from 66 and 94, which are good-sized classrooms. They're essentially functional and more or less the size of a classroom we would build today. So that would, okay, so we went through what it would tear down, what would remain, and then we would, to get to the program that we were desiring, we would then add an appropriate amount of square footage as new construction. So in a combination again of the remodel and addition, so the building construction cost, hard costs about 24.6. Site development is roughly the same as the previous one because you're still on the same site. We pay the same auditorium premium because we're remodeling that same space. There's still a phasing premium. Soil's at 0. Offsite is the same. So it has a lot of similarities to option F in those cases. A little higher soft costs here at up to about 13, again because there's a higher contingency for remodel. So total project cost, adding soft costs and hard costs, are about 43.5 million. Subtract the state match again, and we're at about 30.5 million for a bond cost for that. It does again demolish probably the most historic piece, not counting the auditorium, of the existing school. So that's certainly has to be factored in there. The second, this is G2, a little bit different idea, which would be to retain this historic portion, retain the auditorium and the gym, and then replace as new construction these classrooms. We feel like in some cases, well, obviously in the case of the 1966 edition, it just sort of, from a design standpoint, it was unbelievable how that was allowed to happen. But it's a little bit controversial also in that it's demolishing what would be considered classrooms that are probably the most usable in the school. So it results in a little bit more new construction as opposed to the previous one, but they're not that different. A little bit higher cost because it's more new construction. Site costs relatively the same. Auditorium premium phasing, all the other things are the same. The part costs are about $31.4 million. Soft costs are roughly the same in the 13 million range. Total project cost then 44.5 minus state cost, and it's about 31.6 million for the box. Now, one thing that when we talk about remodeling this existing older portion of the school, what you end up with when all is said and done is classrooms that probably are not the proper proportion. They're small to begin with, and they're boxed in by structure. So it would be really, you could expand them lengthwise, but then you sort of end up with classrooms that aren't really ideal proportions. So that's really a factor of any scenario that's going to remodel this. We have to sort of think about that.
There's a question, Mike.
Tom, looking at your drawing there, I've been in that building enough times in the last 30 years. I don't believe that the auditorium is separate from the 29 and 35 buildings like it's shown there.
Well, I believe there's a third floor up here, right?
Well, but the auditorium is equal to the third floor.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
the roof of the auditorium is, I
Yeah,
believe it's
right.
all interconnected. I don't think it's a separate structure.
I think you're right in terms of massing. There are walls inside there. I think, we have to, I'm not saying it would be an easy thing, but you sort of extricate this mass from that mass. There might be some structural gymnastics that you'd have to go through to do that.
Meg?
Your colleagues who did some work for the city on its community center, I thought they indicated that they could move walls and reconfigure classrooms in that, or reconfigure rooms in that building.
Green.
I was gonna just, actually, we're gonna talk a bit about that when you're done. But the simple answer is, the walls that were moved were not the structural walls that Tom's indicating. They were, and actually, there was very little movement of walls in the proposal, which was one of the things that he felt made it less expensive than if you were trying to get a proportional classroom and an optimal teaching space.
Dick, you have a question?
In your assumptions, are you assuming that there'll be two gyms? You're talking about the gym, but a new construction of this remodel, we talk about, especially the remodel, about adding a second gym.
Yeah, we did look at a program, and to get it, I think that there was another gym. It's a smaller gym, sort of a multi-purpose gym PE space of about maybe 4,000 square feet. So that would be included as part of the new construction.
Steve, did you have an answer to one of these questions?
Actually, it might be a question, so I'll yield to if somebody else has.
Okay, we'll put you on the Dick and then Lauren, or Dick and Steve and Lauren.
No,
You're done? Steve?
I'm finished.
Okay, just to clarify the business about the classroom sizes and proportions that you have up there. This relates to, as I understand it, whether or not the certain interior walls in the building are bearing walls. And if they are bearing walls, the classroom footprint has to remain basically the same. If they're not bearing walls, for example, the corridor could be moved to one side of the building, so make classrooms on the opposite side of the building a good size. So
Right.
which have we got?
Well, in this particular case, we have not moved any of the corridor walls.
Okay, do
They
you know
are,
if it's possible?
it's always possible.
So
And in
what
fact-
Meg was, excuse me, what Meg was trying to say is that we heard in the presentation about the community center that on inspection, the hallway walls turn out not to be bearing walls.
They're probably post and beam type situation in there. And it's that makes it much easier, obviously. You might end up with some columns in a classroom. We also have to figure out how the corridor shifts and whether, because we've got an auditorium that kind of comes out right, the corridor, at least in this portion, is right tied up against the auditorium. And so there's not really a place to move the corridor in that section. We'd be able to do that perhaps in this, when you get outside the auditorium and be able to, but what you don't have anymore is a corridor with classrooms on both sides. You have a corridor with classroom on one side and some other space on the other side. So it's a matter of then balancing out, making sure we have enough classroom space if we want to do that.
Lauren, any question, please?
About the 1966 and then 94, what were you saying would happen in this plan to those spaces? And what is it about the 66 that, just a little bit more on that?
Sure. Well, in the G2 option, we would demolish everything west, I think that's west, west of the old facade of the building. So all of that would come down. So you would restore the original elevation to its original state. You would have the entry, whether that's the main entry or not, but we would restore that to its original condition.
And then there would be new buildings built where the existing 1966 is?
Well, we wouldn't.
New construction?
We would probably, and we haven't really gotten into this to lay it out, it's mostly based on square footage, but I think our idea was that we would build out here, maybe along the street, and replace this and build up against here, but we would not want to obliterate the original elevation, kind of like this 1966 addition did. Just kind of feel like that was really not the right solution. We would want to stay away from that and maybe build here to be able to kind of restore the glory of that 1929 facade.
So that's the biggest problem you see with the 66 is that it's just spread over so much space on one level.
And
other problems, is there any argument that you think, is there a big problem, I think where I'm going is, about retaining 1966? What do you see as the problem of retaining that?
Well, I don't think there's not really any problems, at least from a functional standpoint. It's more aesthetic or sort of design oriented that, from a pure design standpoint, you wouldn't put a single story building that's just a sort of sprawled mass right in front of a historic portion of a piece of building.
Okay, Jen and then Dorothy.
You answered part of it, I think in Lauren's question, but I was curious, if that's left, then the remaining reclaimed space as green space or field or, something like that would be the, or parking perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, I think what we kind of had talked about, at least internally, was whatever we add is probably a two-story addition, so it can have a little bit smaller footprint than all of this one story. So we could probably get all of that space in a much smaller footprint. You could capture this space for green space or parking or whatever other amenity might be needed on the site. But it would at least open up the old school elevation to the street.
And retain the field space too in this plan? Okay.
Yeah.
Dorothy?
Is it possible to remodel a one-story building into a two-story building? Or is it not?
It's possible, but unless it was really designed for that, it's very difficult. I mean, you essentially have to replace all of the roof framing with new floor framing, which is a higher concentrated load. So the existing structure for the roof would not be able to handle the new load. It would have to be replaced. And then you have to sort of trace that all the way down underground to the footings to make sure that they're adequate. And unless it was designed that way, I'm guessing it's not.
Steve, did you have a question?
I'm a offended by the design of the 1966 and newer parts of the building as much as anybody else, but surely there's a way to fix the aesthetics without demolishing all of those buildings, maybe breaking the connection between the oldest parts and the newer parts, or, you know, something, isn't, right? And by the way, I realize we're getting beyond the scope of the thinking we put in.
Well, I guess I want to make sure everybody knows that I don't have a horse in this race. I mean, I'll do whatever you guys want us
You
to
said
do.
yourself, you don't like the way that building looks.
Well, I don't like that, but that doesn't mean that we can't work to try to, I also understand the functional, you know, the value that there is in that in the classroom. So these are just two of probably dozens of ideas that we could look at that, you know, that might have some merit, some might get thrown out.
So more to the point of my question, would it not be cheaper to find another way to repair the aesthetics and keep more of the newer additions so that you wouldn't have to build new?
Right, yes, it would be, that's probably more like F or G. I mean, G1 actually destroys all this, but F was sort of keeping everything.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the comp, okay.
Well, actually, we
No, we already did
Oh, we did do
it. That was number 4.
That was number 4.
got one more. Okay, final option is option J, which is taking a school design that has already been built somewhere and putting it on a site somewhere here. And so our assumption on this one was to use a project that we recently designed for Cheney Middle School. It was designed for a little under 700 students, so what we did, but it was also designed to be able to add 6 classrooms relatively easily. So in order to make it fit the program, we increased the size by adding those. We assumed that you would want those classrooms to begin with, so we made the square footage 117,000. The biggest thing I think with this one is the Cheney Middle School has minimal performing arts space. It has a stage that sort of opens onto the commons / cafeteria, and performances are on that stage, but it's to folding chairs or chairs that are set up only for that performance. So it's certainly not the fixed auditorium with the stage and fly loft and the rigging and lighting that we're talking about in all these other scenarios. So this one it's not all that different from a new construction because it still costs the same to build it. The site cost would be the same as building it on a new site somewhere. So we've seen all these costs before: soils, groundwater, offsite. The auditorium premium is 0 because, like I say, it's already included in that. It didn't have any special equipment or features. Soft costs are the same, or actually they're a little bit lower. The idea here is that since you're building a building that's already been designed, you can save some money off of the architect engineer fees, and so that is lower by $500,000 or so. Other costs are relatively the same. Since the state does fund architect engineer fees to a certain extent, you've actually, the match money is slightly less, $100,000 maybe. So total project cost of about 42.8. Subtract the state funding, it's right around 30 million for this particular.
Okay, Dick, and then Joanne, and Steve, and then Todd.
I see you don't have any, well, kind of two-part question. There's no cost of the land acquisition. I guess with that said, you know, not knowing, well, I've seen the schematic of Cheney, but is that, what's the size of the area that the Cheney School District building sits on? You know, in other words, how many acres do we need for the Cheney thing to work here? And is there any, is Morgan, the existing middle school site, or Valley View have enough vacancy?
Yeah, it's a one-story building, so all of that 117,000 is on one story. So it's kind of got these three wings, so it spreads out quite a bit. So yeah, you'd have to select the site very carefully to make sure that it fits, and also that the circulation of traffic around it works for that particular site.
So recognizing that we may or may not have enough acreage, and then you would have to put in an acquisition or,
Right.
which is not included in stickers now.
So you don't have a question? Okay, Scott?
2 points of additional savings would be, since this building has already been built, why would contingencies still be at the same 2,000,004 when a lot of those contingencies could be removed because the building has already been built? Recognizing you do have a code upgrade, and that creates a whole lot of new contingencies. Second point of possible savings, 2 different general contractors have built this building for Cheney. Cheney built 2 of them. Could those contractors not have a frame of mind that says, I know how to build that building and I can sharpen my pencil and maybe get it less than 212? These are all what ifs, and we don't know until the bids open up. But I think those are 2 real possible ways of saving more than enough for land acquisition costs.
I'm not disagreeing, but I think that every contractors go into every project brand new. And there would be a different list of subcontractors, which really makes up most of the cost of a building. So yes, maybe the same general contractor might bid it, but they don't have any control over who the subcontractors are and how they bid it. So they're not in control of all of the costs. And then on the contingency side, yes, there will be enough differences that we certainly need to carry a contingency. We also have no control that that same contractor who built that building would be the low bidder on this one. So maybe we get a contractor who hasn't built this building before. So, I mean, like you say, there are a lot of unknowns. It could work out better, but it might not either.
So, I'm just curious, I want to focus in on 2 of the proposals and compare them against each other, because there's one thing I just need to clear up for myself. So let's focus on the building new at Valley View and the remodel of Morgan. So it was roughly 31 million and I believe 28 point something million dollars. And I think a lot of discussion is going to happen around that $3 million. So what I'm trying to get at though is that just because it's $3 million less doesn't mean that the students in the less expensive building are going to get the same educational experience, given flow, given older facilities with rooms that don't meet modern standards, given a whole bunch of reasons. That I can just say that the wing space in the old theater is very, very limited for most theaters, things like that. So it's not really necessarily in terms of student experience, apples and apples. Is that a fair statement?
That's very fair, yes. I think that's where a lot of these other criteria that you're judging each of these options by sort of start to weigh in. And then you have to decide, is the 3 million, is it worth it? Are we getting that? Are we getting the greater experience for students and the greater educational process? Or does it matter? I think that's where you guys, when you start applying the other criteria to the options, it starts to weigh in there pretty heavily.
Thank you.
Okay, we're actually over time at this point. Did you have any?
I want to have this in the summary, and
Okay.
we can leave this up there. It kind of takes every option, lists out the hard cost, soft cost, and then one amount at the bottom. So if we're moving around, we can get up here and actually look at this.
I have a question.
You have a quick question?
Yeah.
Okay.
May we get a hard copy of that?
Right now?
No, I mean, may we get one?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Just
I
this.
believe that Tom's going to give us the PowerPoint that can be emailed around, and if you'd like this printed out, then no, you can do that. Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Okay, Tom will be around for the rest of the meeting so that if you have further questions, when you have further questions, they'll be there to answer.
I actually have a quick question on getting the information back out to the public about us. If the options tied to the options that we're reading, is there some way we can get that summary tied directly to what? This feels a little abstract.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I hope
Megan.
this doesn't go on.
I'm just saying, I mean, we're going
Yeah.
to close it, but I think that would be
It's not this-
helpful to try that.
Yeah, there,
It's not, this- okay, we
not the
can't
same.
do that. So what we need, okay?
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so I need to do 5 minutes on the Morgan thing. So there's a couple things, I didn't realize we'd have cast of thousands here today. So we may ask the committee if you can share, and then we have copies for folks in the audience. So if we have extra copies, if they can go out, there's probably, I think there's 21 copies.
Can you all get some?
Is this all the same, or are these different?
Okay, do we have enough for everybody to take a quick look?
I think they're the same.
You good? Yes, no?
Same color.
Same color.
Okay, so just a brief, we've gone through kind of, that wasn't personal, right?
It wasn't fun.
There goes karma. Okay, so just for those who have not heard, basically, there's been some discussion between the district and the city about potential adaptive reuse of Morgan as a community center. And as a part of that exercise, then the city actually contracted after a process with NAC, not with Tom, but with one of his compatriots, basically to give us some costing on what it would do to make that occur. Because much as we're doing this evening, with these dollars, what we in the city knew, and I think for this group of folks know, that it all hinges on the dollars. I mean, if we're going to pursue a particular route here, we need to understand what it's going to cost and ultimately what we're going to ask our community to do. So what's in front of you, as you're looking at it, is simply it's a rough draft. It's the first draft, and it's not the final. But it was what was presented to the city committee showing the potential uses for the old building, Morgan, as a community center. Okay, a couple things. It should be laid, first floor concept, second floor. I really would ask that we not go into detail here because some of that actually shifted after the committee reviewed some of the use. And then you'll see a third floor concept plan. Should be the last page. What that one will be is actually not very colorful compared to everything else, because one of the ways that Keith suggested, who's the architect, for cost savings was phase in. I mean, I think the total project is about 69,000 square feet of the old building. We don't need 69,000 square feet for a community center. So what he did was take the work that the community center committee had already done in identifying program needs, office space, those pieces, and then put them into a repurposed Morgan. Does that make sense? So a couple things just physically. If you look, for all intents and purposes, what this does is more or less it uses the footprint, but it uses the existing classroom space in Morgan. I mean, that's just the simplest way to put it. If the only real alterations that occur is if you look on the first floor concept, the gym becomes two smaller gyms that are not like regulation size. Because one of the things the district would need is a regulation size gym, because if you're doing intramurals, or you're having other schools come in for basketball or volleyball or all those things, you need to do that. For some of the activities that the city does, we would not need that regulation gym. So it actually then removes the old, up above the bleachers. That whole comes out, and so the gym really becomes two by going side by side on that access. Does that make sense? It also changes slightly the configuration in the locker room, and I think that wrestling room or the gymnastics room is also kind of messed with a little bit. I think like the women's locker room moves up into the back end where the men's room is. But for all intents and purposes, and so Meg touched on it earlier, Meg and Steve and Dick were actually at the presentation, so if I screw it up, you can tell me. If I'm lying, don't say anything to anybody. But functionally then, so what they really, so the other thing that he did suggest doing, and it was touched on when we talked about the 66 wing and the aesthetics, which might be a bad word, but functionally what was proposed would be to actually take this portion of it out. So that in the adaptive reuse, if we were to move forward with the community center, this would in fact become its own building. The district then, which, I mean, we talked about, the district retaining use of the 66 and 94 section. But what we would attempt to do then is restore, you referred to it as elevations. You would still have this in front, but the idea would be that aesthetically you would be attempting to restore what was once the main entrance of Morgan with about a 25 to 30 foot walkway that would lead in from the streets. And so the idea there, if we were to move forward with this, is that our public then would be encouraged to have a single point of entry. We talked a little bit about, if you look on this side, this would be kind of the senior center side or adult activity center side. We may keep an entrance on this side simply because of mobility and access issues. But functionally what we'd like to see if we were to pursue this is really an integrated entryway that restores the main entrance that was once Morgan. Any questions? What one was that? Okay, so are there any questions on just that proposal? We haven't finalized it. I mean, there really were some alterations, but nothing material in terms of what was laid out. I mean, there was some discussion about maybe we move some offices upstairs, create a different lounge downstairs. There was some talk about needing a green room for staging. So there's a thing marked the game room on the first floor concept. That would actually shift probably in our second iteration to a green room, so there would be a staging area. So there were those kinds of conversations. So,
Dorothy, Dorothy has a question.
Yes. How much are we talking about?
Well, that was my next piece.
Pardon?
If you just let me continue, I'll get to that. Trust me on that.
We're getting down the bottom line.
But just quickly then, are there any kind of quick questions on if we were in terms of the conceptual framework or what was proposed? Does it seem consistent with hopefully it's consistent with what we've been discussing, sort of with the community and with this group?
Can you just give us an idea of how the committee reacted to this presentation?
People got really excited. Very excited.
Dick and Steve and I, we all thought.
Yeah, I mean, Steve posted.
For the school business. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, you did, yeah, you were there, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah, I mean, I think that, for me, I mean, I gotta tell you, I mean, I don't know where we're gonna end up with this or not, but you know, it's like, people, I mean, I talk a lot, people know that, right? And it was like, he stood up there and presented that thing, and we got to the end of the presentation, and it was like, shit, this could happen. You know, I mean, oh my God. I mean, because it's there. I mean, if we choose to move down this path, there's a possibility. And in my mind, it was discussion, but it never had been that concrete. So cost, Dorothy. Basically, it comes out to about the same cost per square foot that we're talking about with anything that we've talked about this evening. Is the projected cost, though it includes some of the soft costs, were handled a little bit differently in this proposal, but not materially. So cost per square foot is $216. So the estimate that was provided, and this just came in late yesterday afternoon, so I haven't reviewed this with council. I've shared it actually with Dick and with Paul, just so we had that in the district. But it was 15.1 million. And I think this is where it's a little different. The 15.1 includes a $1.3 million contingency. the way we laid it out here was a little different. And then 580,000 for escalation. And the 580,000 escalation, just to be clear, is it assumes construction in 2016. So if we go through 2015, you're going to do, because we again would be looking at probably bonding. So by the time you get to there, so there's an escalator in there for the projected cost in 2016 if we were to move forward with this. So a couple things within that 15.1, if we're looking at that, does not finish. What it will do functionally is give us the community center on the first 2 floors. It does work in the theater that we've discussed. It does not complete the 3rd floor as usable space. So it kind of, what it does is really create, and it deals with the environmental envelope, I think is what Keith calls it. Or it was the exterior, the windows, HVAC, all the systems. Somebody mentioned the walls. One of the things that was discovered when he was going through there is there's actually a space, sound like, between the interior corridor walls, and tell me if I get this right, the interior corridor walls and the classroom walls. So part of what that means then is if we're upgrading for a community center without having to move walls because we don't have the same educational needs that the district's talking about with classrooms, when we go to upgrade the technology, you drop it in that space. It's there, it's existing. I mean, it's kind of intriguing that they would have anticipated computers in 1990.
Well, that's what it was.
But the fact remains, it's there. The same thing actually is there with the HVAC system. The conduit or the corridors or tunnels that he examined lend themselves very easily to a modernization. So those were all pluses. If we were, and I think these are things that the committee and ultimately the community would decide, if we were to pursue the 3rd floor, there's an estimated cost of about another $1 million to that, 15.1. And then but we actually asked him specifically to look at some of the modernization. He estimated motorized stage rigging sets, which Tor probably understands better than I do. I just see lights moving back and forth. Would be about 271,000 to be added on to that. So, I mean so going back to the thing, what we're saying is, at this point, what will be presented to City Council on September 17th is a slightly updated version of this with a cost that probably will not alter much from what I'm presenting here this evening, of about 15.1 million.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple questions, however, we are over our time. We have 3 questions and a comment. I wanted to check with observers. Are there any observers that have comments that would like to have? Jeff? Right, that's showing. Okay, Jeff, anybody else?
I'm Kate.
Kate, great, okay. And so we have, okay, and Fritz. Okay, we have at this point an option to extend the time for this and change the agenda, and that would take away from the evaluation time that comes after this. Do we have, so I would propose that we go for 5 extra minutes, and take the 3 comments from the observers and then move forward. Any concerns with that?
Questions from the team?
And we will take the fee. Okay, so 10 minutes. 10 minutes, including the questions from the team. Okay, that's close enough. Okay, so we'll go with the questions from the observers, the comments from the observers first. Each of you, in this order, Jeff, Kay, and Fritz, will have 2 minutes at least. No more than 2 minutes. Less than that's fine too. Okay, if you could state your full name and then.
You want me to stand up or?
Nah.
No.
Well, it's up to you.
I'm in the front row.
Yeah, it's whatever you'd like.
Jeffrey Snedeker, Snedeker. Do you want more information?
Nah.
My understanding was that at one point in time this was going to be a discussion of performing arts. I understand that I can see that that's changed. But I think the comments I have should take only 2 minutes and should apply. Very glad to hear that an auditorium is mentioned in all options except the last one. So that's good. Just a couple of things that I ask you to remember. First of all, enrollment in district music classes over the past 2 years has actually increased, and there's no reason to expect any change in the future. When considering recommendations for classroom spaces, please take into account the actual number of students such that these numbers can be accommodated. Second, attendance at middle school music concerts averages between 400 and 500 people in the audience per concert, with 2 concerts that peaked over 600. As you consider facility recommendations, please keep that in mind. By the way, 550 means also that neither the high school nor the middle school can meet at one time in that space. If the next bond proposal does not include an auditorium that can adequately serve district needs, it's a fair estimation that a large number of people who voted yes this last time will vote no. Please consider recommending a facility that promotes a balanced curriculum, not just subjects that are currently being publicized in ways that make them seem appealing or play on fears at this time. This is supposed to be about all of our children and all of their interests, as well as their potential as whole people and unique individuals. An auditorium in a school and a district has multiple curricular and extracurricular arts and non-arts uses that help to create a sense of community in the school and in the district. There are many other aspects of schools that also contribute to community, but auditoriums are unique in the nature of what is presented and the behaviors that they promote. What if the current situation was reversed, if one had to use an existing auditorium and convert it to a gymnasium each time it was needed? And I believe there are enough actual and potential uses within the school district such that community needs do not need to be considered in the process of this. It's about the curriculum. Finally, I ask you to consider what you think Ellensburg should aspire to be. Zillah and Sunnyside school districts have separate performing arts centers. East Valley in Yakima is about to propose a bond for the Performing Arts Center as one of its centerpieces. Sela, Kittitas, and Cheney, as we heard today, build new facilities without auditoriums. And I ask again, who should Ellensburg aspire to be? No one is asking for a separate Performing Arts Center in any of these cases. Then why should an auditorium be considered and perceived as extravagant? Thank you.
Thank you,
May I ask you a question? Whether you answered or not?
If it's really quick.
I promise. In each of these proposals, the state assistance number did not change, despite different actions being taken on the existing building. And I just wonder if that's accurate, especially if the parts that remain are continued to be used as mainstream education facilities. My understanding is it would have to change based on the use of what remains.
Okay, and we won't
You don't
have a
have to
chance
answer
to
that now.
answer
You
that.
don't have to answer that.
Okay, Kate,
I've just taken it all, said
okay,
it all.
No?
okay. There you go. And Fritz, then, you have-
Ditto, ditto.
It's a very exciting prospect to see to hear this community center and the ability to have the performance center here and have a community center in the city. As a person from the rural area, I think that you have to realize the school district covers a tremendous area, as you well know. And we had, was a member of the committee that the original strategic facilities planning committee, and our conclusions were reached after going through the same similar presentations which you've had here. And we came down on the fact that we need to have a new school at a new location. But some of the reservations had to do with the fact that the new location is scrunched in a way, and looking to the future, to what we want Ellensburg to become and what we want this area to become. Trying to squeeze it into the existing space in Valley View was a reservation which at least I had. And to me, the conclusions which could be reached very quickly are that we need a new school, we need a new location, we need to put Morgan to good use, and we need a better site, and that better site is right across Third Street, which will be extended from Valley View. So these are the things that are going through my mind as I hear the discussion here tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Fritz. Okay, so we have, and I missed the order, so we have Lauren, and I'm just going to make the order here, Meg, Jimmy, Scott, and we have a comment from Michelle, good. And Dick, we have a comment from you. Anybody I missed? Yeah, and so we have colorblind Dick. Okay, what color did you have up? Blue, okay. And another yellow from Dorothy. Okay, so Lauren, your question.
My question for Bruce was, how many phases, you mentioned phases, but how many phases are you proposing?
2.
And what was the cost in each phase, the total?
15.1 if we do not do the 3rd floor. If we want to include the 3rd floor now, it's $1 million, or we would have to come up with $1 million plus whatever inflation is.
15.1 for the first phase and the second? The cost of the second phase?
It's $1 million, but you've got an inflationary pressure that if you do it 5 years out, $1 million isn't a good number.
So, I mean, I have seen your diagram probably, but what of the areas that are not used, that are left, would those be demolished, or what would be done with the unused?
I'm not clear with the question.
Did you say
It's
that?
a 66 building and everything else.
That's a district question.
Yeah. Oh, that's.
The only thing that the city can deal with and is focused on is a community center in Morgan. And the district has to want to play. This is still on district land, and it's a district building that's being used for education. So the only piece here is the old Morgan. And all of it would be retained. The environment, as I mentioned, the exterior would be restored. There would be a new roof put on it because of structural issues. But the 3rd floor would not be improved at this time.
So the total cost to the taxpayer, we would look back to the district and add those cost estimates together.
I don't understand that.
There'd be costs involved.
If you want to add to the taxpayer, the figure is wherever we end up with options, if it's $30 million, let's just say, and we decide, and a recommendation goes to the school board for this option that costs $30 million of bonding. The cost of the
I
tax.
understand that. That's okay. I'll leave it. I'm going to yield to the other people who have questions right now.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe we can talk to Ray.
Yeah, Meg?
I think I get it.
Yeah. Does the 15 million include soft costs? You said they were handled differently.
It's not all the soft costs, but no, fundamentally no. There would probably be about another $3 million.
Yeah, you said 30 to 35% soft cost.
So,
And then, if I may ask Tom, this is a real loaded question. Can you say anything at all about why these bottom lines are all quite a bit lower than our last one?
Yeah, I don't know all the specifics of how those numbers were generated. The one thing that kind of stuck out to us was the percentage of soft cost was so high. And this chart actually kind of did a little math and kind of see where we ended up with soft costs as a percentage of hard costs, and we're all in the 35 to 45% range. And I think that initial one, the last one, was somewhere around 55 or more percent. I don't know where that came from, but that's generally we find it in the 40% range for school construction.
Okay, Jimmy, your question.
2 questions to Bruce. Bruce, number 1, you were talking about $19 billion approximately, I believe. Were those figures given to you by someone who is qualified to give you those estimates?
Not at all.
It was his firm. Someone in his firm did the
Okay,
work.
thank you, that's all I want to know. The second question is, when would you run that bond issue?
I think that's something we would need to have a discussion. I mean, we haven't
The school board intends to run the bond issue in February of next year. I think if there would be some question about running a city bond issue,
I think it's part of the discussion, certainly the discussion, when Scott and I had preliminary discussions way back when, that was one of the issues that he raised. We have no desire to get in the way of passing, of a school bond not passing. But we also understand that part of the reason that it did not pass historically is because there was not an adequate solution that was firmly committed to deal with Morgan. And so whether we run it concurrently or whether we run it 6 months out, at some point, that issue will need to come from the voters, and the voters will need to understand that.
I would suggest to you, if you run a $19 million bond along with a $30 million bond, both of them are apt to fail.
Well, and again, that's not my decision, and it's not, I mean, and certainly we would be working with the district to determine what would be the best way to do it. Is that politically expedient enough?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
A simple observation I think you can clarify is remodeling a building for old people is only 15 million, whereas remodeling a building for young people is 30 million. Difference in seismic codes, different in codes for how you do the building.
I think the predominant, yeah, it's not as much as part of what's going on. We actually, Meg asked that same question. The response that Keith gave, the architect that was doing the presentation, was he wasn't clear, he was going to get back to us, but he believes seismic codes are seismic codes. It's not going to make a difference whether you put, I mean, we don't necessarily want to kill our old people off because I'm becoming one of them rapidly, any more than we want to kill our youth.
But classroom size is different than, well, I'll take whatever size I can get for recreation.
And yeah, so functionally, then that was actually primarily, I think, part of what happened. This does not really materially change the interior of Morgan. You know, I mean, the issue that Mike keeps raising in terms of the proportionality of classroom size and moving walls, those things. I mean, those interior, you know, the class, they could be moved, but there's just simply no reason. When you look at the amount of space that's there that becomes functional for community activities, you just take the classrooms and really, is the wall solid, you drop the wiring in, and probably spackle and paint. It's
Do you have a
different.
quick response?
Yeah, the size is way smaller. Too. I mean, it's not anywhere near as big as the middle school, and you're not developing the grounds for the
Right.
outside activities. And,
It's 69,000 square feet, I think, is what we learned on.
Dorothy, do you still have a question?
Yes, I do. They said that they really didn't want to use Morgan because it was not safe for the children and the youth, and yet you've got the youth center, again, you kind of,
Well,
what was said, and you've got for the elderly.
well, there's a couple, let me respond to a couple things. One of the statements that the architect made in the presentation was that he felt that that basically the building had good bones, is that what people, so that structurally he felt like it was a building that was very, very adapted to reuse. The other thing I think we need to be clear about, whether we move forward with the school or whether we move forward with the community center or it just sits there and continues, any repurposing has to meet seismic code. So you're not, the issues that were raised by the seismic evaluations will have to be addressed by anyone coming in there to use that building. So just, I mean, but so to be clear, make sure that as you go forward, you understand a significant portion of the cost of this are the seismic upgrades and the engineering that needs to go into making that building safe for anyone to use.
Okay, and Michelle, you had a comment?
I do, because we've talked a lot about these different options, and one of the things that came up when we started talking about modernization or demoing some of it is the word aesthetics. And at our first meeting, the conversation came up that nobody wants to build a mansion, so to speak. I would really hope that we would not put aesthetics as a priority in any way, shape, or form above program needs. If we need a building that looks old, we can design it to look old. But I guess I don't want that to even be a part of the conversation, because we're talking about a functional school for middle school students that does not exist. And I just feel really strongly that that needs to be stated, and having, I mean, I've seen pictures of Morgan before the 66 edition was put on. It's nothing that fabulous. It really isn't. I mean, it's fine, but we don't need a building that looks a certain way. We need a building that provides a functional space for every one of our program needs, including performing arts and athletics and science and technology. So I just needed to say it.
Thanks, Michelle. Dick?
Well, it's already been clarified that the 15 million, there's 30 to 35% soft costs, and so, you know, we would want to compare apples to apples, and we need to include that. But, and the other comment is, and Bruce is right, this is still, we're at the ground level, we're still at the threshold, there's really a lot more discussion, and certainly with council amongst themselves, not with the board too. So this is all preliminary, and this is just the first step.
Thank you,
More
Dick.
to come.
Okay, so, how about we go for a 9-minute break here? It's 7:11. Bruce?
I'm done.
Bad ex-mayor.
No longer honorable once again.
Okay, so what is scheduled for next is to go through each of the 14 options. Now, this is just a subset that he kind of combined, so let's not get too much into this. But there were 14 options that this group identified as being under consideration. And so the small groups would get together, everybody's going to evaluate those things. So the change is that I would make a call for consensus on 2 of those options. They seem like they might be, we've had a request as well, that these options be called for consensus. This would be a kind of a different sort of thing. If there's any objection whatsoever, we will go through the entire process with those options as well. Did you have a?
Oh, no, I was just voting yes.
Okay. So the first option that I would call for consensus is known is option K. I don't know how many of you have your notebooks with you, but this is so-called portable city. We do not have a costing on this, but this option is portable city at existing Morgan Middle School, mothball or destroy old sections of Morgan Middle School. At this point, I would ask the team that if, okay, so the call would be for dropping this option out of further consideration. Just use a green or a red. If there are any reds, we will continue with it. Okay, I want to see everybody's cards. We have green. K is off, is no longer under consideration. So we don't have to worry about portables at Morgan. The second option that I would call for consensus to remove from consideration is the same as option C here, remodeling the Morgan Middle School and building across from the LDS on Cadettas Highway. That is 2 6 through 8 middle school. Consensus would be we drop this from consideration. Okay, we now have 12 options. Yes,
I don't have my list in front of me, and I apologize for that, but is the option of 5, 6, and a 7, 8 still on the table?
I believe that's under other mixed plans. Is that true?
No,
Which one is that, Meg? That's the Walker plan, right?
that's the Walker plan.
I didn't actually understand. Well, he didn't give a cost on it, but
Wouldn't it be the same as C?
So,
Yeah, there's actually,
it would still be
option
2
C, option C, as we pointed out a while ago, is actually 2 to 9.
it's 2 to 8. There's 2 to 6 to 8 in it. So the Walker plan does not come up as under,
Could be somewhere else, but
it's not.
well,
Okay, so C includes the Whopper plan, is that what you're saying? Even though it doesn't say it does? Okay, so we need to go back and do a, okay, okay, so what the group took off was 2 6 to 8 middle schools. What about the option of the Walker plan, which was one, May, help me out here, 156 and 168. 7-8, yeah, okay. So, do you want to call for that one? I'm gonna ask, because you were the one that brought it, so I don't want to, if there's going to be any kind of discussion about that.
Yeah, I brought it.
Okay, so Molly, having brought that option to the table, is willing to have that also call for consensus to remove it without further consideration.
What one is that?
That would actually be a subset of C. I thought it was a separate one, but apparently it's not.
C2, really.
Okay, we have one red card. Okay, so we will continue to consider that one. We don't have time for discussion on that, but we will take that one through the process. So we kind of took off C1, and it looks like we have a C2 here, which is the Walker plan. Okay, so congratulations, you got one down for sure and kind of 1.5. So now I'd like you to split up into the same groups you were in last time, which were, and Paul, by the way, was not able to come this evening. There was a death in the family, and so he wanted to be with his family. What?
Some people do anything.
Yeah. Okay. So you two will be on your own again. So the 6 groups are Dorothy, Stephen, Michelle, Allison, Tor, and Jimmy. And I thought I said Jimmy to each other, but I didn't. Allison, Tor, and Jimmy, Lauren, Scott, and Dick, Mike, Marlene, and Molly, Bruce, Meg, and Joanne, and then Audrey and Jen and Paul. So a couple of you are going to have to change seats, but if you could get in your group, and I'll go through it again quickly, the process you're going to go through for the next hour. And L and N that you have in front of you, they're somewhat similar, so that hopefully some of the numbers this will help you. So what you want to do at the top is put your group, on the blank ones, put your group member names, circle the scribe's name, scribe names. Because some of you did look at option A before, but there were no costs, you're going to be redoing it slightly, including costs. I have given you your old sheets so that you can transfer the numbers from last time if your new people agree to that. There were so many people gone last time, this is another way of giving them a chance, but mainly it's to catch the cost step. The new sheets have the criteria in a different order. They are now ordered by weight. So the highest weight first, lowest weight last. Because we didn't have that information for the last one. Just a second, Allison. So you'll have to, when you do the transfer over of the numbers, that's the only time that should make any difference. Okay, Allison, you had a question?
Can somebody remind me what the bond amount was last time? What did we ask for in the last poll?
38 or 39.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, 39?
38.9.
38.
Then you should ask me.
Okay, so please make sure that when you score, so what you want to do is, I think everybody has somebody in the group that's done this before. You want to make the score either 0, 2, 4, or 6. 0 meaning it does this option does not meet any of the requirements of a given criterion. 2, it meets some of the requirements, not all of them. This is all listed on the top of each of the sheets. 4 meets the requirements. 6 means it exceeds the requirements. Please do not put
3.
3,
Sort of.
1, 3, or 5, or non-applicable. If it's not applicable, it's gonna be a 0, right? Okay, because it messes with the system, I know, these guys. So Lauren, keep them in line here. These guys are problems. Yeah, okay. So, and don't put a range 0 to 2. Find agreement within your small group as to what the number is. Please change any numbers from last time that didn't fit this. Okay, don't worry about calculating the weighted score.
Give it a score too.
And go. Oh, and then what you got? Somebody's notes? Okay, so that happened. Okay, so give it to me. Okay, so we do need to go back through at Joanne's request, which I think was a very good request, and go back to the options that the group took off the list, which were the portable city and the 2 6 through 8 middle schools. First of all, I want to clarify the Walker plan was on there. It is option D. Some of you got to that point, we realized that it just wasn't called the Walker plan, but that's basically the Walker plan, which is you remodel Morgan and you put another school on Capitol, or south of Capitol. Does anyone want to propose why the group dropped Portable City?
Yes, it's not a long-term solution. Portables only last about 20 years.
Right.
For what you said last week, or last time.
Okay.
Well, if you think the 1966 one is ugly.
Well, and this is not about discussion. This is about putting a foundation underneath it. If there's not a foundation, then we need to go back to it. Yes, Steve.
Because it would suck.
Because it would suck. Okay.
I second that.
Okay. Do we have a consensus on something like that? That we written down. Okay.
I left the chicken coops on the phone.
Concerns having so many separate buildings also.
Okay.
Well, and if you just want to add to that, I would say you won't meet the requirements of the curriculum. You won't meet the curriculum.
No program needs. Okay, that's enough. And probably won't meet the sign language.
Security, upside entrances.
Okay. Okay, so the other ones. Yeah, okay, that one's like totally dead. Okay, so the other one was building the 2 middle schools. One across from LDS and basically the 2 6 through 8. Yes, Tor, would you like to?
Cost prohibitive.
Okay. Cost prohibitive. Does that match what?
And I mentioned both first costs, like the bond costs, plus operational costs.
Yes.
Double win.
Okay. We have the foundation.
Without any benefit to the Walker.
Without any benefits of, okay.
Well, it doesn't meet the
Okay,
goals
so
that
we have 2 minutes. How did you, oh, yes?
If you're gonna take one off because it costs too much, then you need to go through and get those that have 2 or just 1 where we have to buy the property, we have to bond the property.
And so that'll come.
That'll fall out.
That'll come.
So we put them as 2 to 3 million versus an extra.
Yeah, I think these were the low-hanging fruit is what
These were the easy ones.
and we had to have a win on this one, so.
Not before me.
So, any quick comments about the end of the process, any comments about meeting? Yes, Tor?
I have a comment, process question.
Yes.
Not reflective of Steve's red card at all. But at one point, I proffered a red card, and it was requested of me to clarify what it was about the thing so I'm just wondering, is that standard procedure to require why, if there's only 1 red card, what is keeping you from consensus?
Generally, yes. In terms of process, generally that's true. For something like this that was kind of a speed consensus, it's either green or red, and if there's anything red, we go forward and we default to the status quo. that's what, does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Lauren?
Well, I think it's kind of coming off of what Dorothy was saying, that there's a little bit of uncomfortable feeling about the way that cost as an issue breaks out in all of these considerations. And some of them have just an inconsistency about, as you said, if we're going to take that out for cost, then whatever. Yeah, some places that cost is implicated but not listed in the criteria, that's my comment.
Okay. Any other comments about how the meeting went? We have 30 seconds left.
My comment is that I would like to just clarify something that I heard, having been on the other committee, that this was very much like the other committee, and I do not feel that the work of this committee is like the other committee at all. We are in whatever week we are, and we're looking at 13 options. By the week 3, we had 1 last time. So I just want to make that really clear, that I think that this process is working and that we are all working very hard at it, and it's a very different process.
Okay, so thank you all for all your hard work. There was a lot of information. There's more work to come. We will see you in 2 weeks, and thank you all. Thank all the observers for coming and for your comments.